So the other day, I was watching a TV show on ABC in which they asked centenarians, what's the greatest, most transformative invention of the last 100 years? Now, I personally had a little bit of a chuckle when the most common answer to this grand question was definitely the washing machine. But when you think about it, the washing machine really did transform the lives of everyday Australians. But the invention of the washing machine was not the automation of the job of the homemaker. There's always more work to be done. Today's dialogue about the future of work tends to have a slightly more gloomy tone. Perhaps we worry about jobs lost to automation, and perhaps we imagine millions of people unemployed. Perhaps you worry about your children and where they might work. And perhaps throughout all of this, you feel like this is it. We have finally created the technology that will render us and our skills and abilities obsolete. Maybe you feel a little bit like this. But we've experienced massive transformations in work before, and I'd like to use the agricultural industry as an example. Now, this graph depicts the decline in employment in agriculture from the 1960s to today. What it doesn't represent, though, is an equally steep decline in productivity. With the rise of factory farming and its associated technologies, actually the agricultural industry became more efficient than ever. In fact, today Australia's 135,000 farmers produce enough food to feed 80 million people. But what about all these jobs that no longer exist? Well, actually, generally speaking, the employment rate in Australia and the number of people employed is on the rise. But we as human beings are cognitively wired to identify threats in our environment, to worry and catastrophize and kind of fear for the worst. The fact is, though, that jobs may die, but work persists. So there will be jobs that will be completely automated by technology, and these will be jobs that we know involve repetitive, routine, sort of predictable work. But actually, predictions say that this will only be less than 5% of jobs, of occupations. There will also be jobs that will be created to develop and maintain all these new technologies. Again, though, this is only around 8 to 9% of occupations. What I'd like to talk about today is how work will be changed so that people will work with and beyond the capabilities of technology. Because it's in most of these jobs, around 60%, that part, roughly 1/3, will be automated. How can we actively design our organizations so that people work alongside these technologies? To give you a bit of a sense of what this sort of future work might look like, I'd like to tell you about Lily. By the time she was 7 years old, Lily had been experiencing severe feeding and growth issues and had lots of problems with lots of different parts of her body. She'd had to attend 50 inpatient visits and 200 outpatient visits, and this included 14 general anaesthetics. During this time, Lily and her family were in an extreme state of anxiety and uncertainty and isolation. Lily had been ferried all around the world to find an answer for what was going on with her and seen multiple specialists around the world. She was suffering from a rare disease, a complex, multisystemic, likely chronically debilitating and life-threatening disease. Now, although this might seem like quite a unique, specialized case, actually, Lily is not alone. She is one of 60,000 other children in West Australia with a rare disease. 190,000 West Australians in total, 2 million people across Australia, and across the globe, 350 million people who are suffering from a rare disease. And these are things that you might have heard of, such as cystic fibrosis and Huntington's disease, plus around 8,000 others. So alone they're rare, but together they affect about 1 in 12 people. So I want to give you a bit of a sense of what the journey is like for a patient who has an undiagnosed rare disease. For a significant proportion of people, they won't receive a diagnosis for between 3 months and sort of 5 years. And still, a significant proportion might not receive a diagnosis from between 5 to upwards of 20 years without an answer. During this time, to try and figure out what's wrong with them, they'll see multiple specialists. Quite a significant proportion will see between 3 and 5 doctors. And still a significant proportion of people might see between 6 and upwards of 10 doctors just to find an answer. So obviously this is a long and costly journey for patients, for their families, emotionally and financially, also for the doctors who just want an answer for their patient. This problem is also hugely costly for the health system. A study that looked at 2% of West Australians who suffered from a rare disease found that they accounted for 10.5% of WA hospital inpatient expenditure at a price tag of $395 million. This was only inpatient expenditure, not outpatient, not indirect costs to the family. And it also actually only looked at less than 500 of the 8,000 different rare diseases. So it's likely an underestimate. So I mentioned there are 8,000 of these rare diseases, and that seems pretty monumental as it is. Actually, this list is growing, and it's growing by about 5 new diseases that are published in the medical literature each week. So it's a huge, complex problem. How on earth do we tackle something like this at work? Early last year, the West Australian Undiagnosed Diseases Program was established to bring together clinicians from across the health system with different areas of expertise to pool that expertise, to pool their diagnostic skills to try and find answers for children in WA with an undiagnosed rare disease. And they do so using cutting-edge Australian technology. Now, this program in WA is actually part of a global movement of clinicians coming together to diagnose these undiagnosed patients. Global action to meet patient needs. Why am I telling you about this? In many ways, this program and these teams really epitomise the future of work, what we call 4D teams. So teams that are diverse. We bring together different areas of expertise that are required to solve these complex problems. They're digital, so they're using the technology that we're developing at such a rapid rate. They're also dynamic. So gone are the traditional days where we kind of think of teams as having a set number of people who stay there the whole time. Maybe we have different experts coming in and out to contribute their knowledge or their skills. And finally, these teams are dispersed, perhaps bringing together different people from different parts of an organisation, from different states, from different countries. So I've given you a cool little mnemonic, but what does working in these teams actually feel like? If you'll indulge me for a minute, I'd like to ask you to imagine that you're in the middle of your career. You've built up a bit of expertise and experience, but your field is dynamic and always changing, and there's always more to learn. You arrive at a meeting room, perhaps a little bit like this one. You're 10 minutes early, good job, and you sit down and people start coming in. You see some people you recognise, some people you've worked with before. You see someone who you recognise as an expert in your field, and other people trickle in that you haven't met before that you don't know. Everyone sits down, and as the clock strikes 2 p.m, the meeting starts. The leader gets up and he explains today's wicked problem. He gives you all the information, some of which falls in your area of expertise, other stuff's a little bit more unclear. And they explain how the problem has tried to be solved in the past with some inconclusive findings. He finishes explaining this and says, okay, right, I'd like to go around the table and I'd like each of you to tell me what you think the solution to this problem is. Because of where you're sitting, you're first. How might you feel? Perhaps you've been in a situation like this before. This is what the West Australian Undiagnosed Diseases Program might feel like. So perhaps if you didn't already, you can get a bit of a sense for why teams might not always work as well as they could. And we have a lot of research to demonstrate this already. For example, something that we call groupthink. So when people in a team tend to converge towards a particular idea or a particular way of thinking because people don't want to rock the boat or disrupt the team. For the people who may be a bit more comfortable with rocking the boat, we may have conflict in teams between different people with different ways of thinking or different personalities. When we talk about 4D teams in particular though, there are some additional issues that might arise. See, we have a limited capacity to process information as human beings. In a social setting, what this means is that we love to put people in boxes, and we like to assume that all the people in one box act and think the same, and that our box is the better box. So when we have diversity, especially in the workplace, we can have fragmentation into these little subgroups, and what that often leads to is poor communication and poor collaboration. Luckily though, Lily's story has a happy ending. She was actually the first patient to come through the WA Undiagnosed Diseases program with a stack of files about this high, and the interdisciplinary team converged on a diagnosis for Lily that has a prevalence of 1 in a million. The WA UDP continues to provide answers for children and now adolescents with undiagnosed rare diseases. But in the words of one of the clinicians in the program, why? Why is it that these children have seen all these different specialists, but only when they come to this program do they get an answer? So preliminarily, what we've found is that absolutely, this great technology that these clinicians have access to allows them to pull information from across the globe about different patients in other countries to aid their decision making. And yes, we talk more and more in the future of work conversation about training people and making sure they have interpersonal skills and teamwork skills so they can work in these new environments, and that has been shown to be important. But this is usually where the conversation stops, and I think we're missing a crucial part. What we've found so far in this setting is that team design is crucial to how these teams work together and how effective they are. What I mean by that is actually the pool or the spread of different expertise in the program, in the team, including mixing where people are at in their career, which affects how they think and how they approach problems. To pull that together, the role of the leader is also really crucial, bringing the expertise together and keeping the conversation moving towards an endpoint. Also, to get those ideas in the first place, creating an environment of what we call psychological safety. So an environment where people feel safe and respected and comfortable to ask the silly questions or make the silly suggestions where they might not usually. And finally, the more that these clinicians work together and they develop shared experiences, it's a little bit less perhaps of us and them and more we, less of that fragmentation. So what we're trying to figure out now is how important are each of these things exactly? How important is the technology in reaching a diagnosis for these patients? Perhaps does having a really good leader buffer some of the fragmentation that might normally occur in these diverse teams? And importantly, how can we take what we learn about this really successful 4D team and apply it to other 4D teams to more actively design the future of work? Because when we think about it, when we think about what the future of work really looks like, what it might involve, we should think about the skills and the capabilities that people should be trained in and develop through their schooling. But when it comes to work, we have the opportunity to actively design jobs, to design organizations, to design work. We do it through the policy that we write, we do it through our organizational structures, how we structure teams, and how we give individuals the autonomy to design work. It's when every day brings a little bit of a surprise that we have designed work for humans and not for robots. Thank you.